The Last Holiday Concert, Chapter 11, Feelings. At 3:15 on Friday, Mr. Minor sat alone in the music room. He slumped in his chair, staring at the wall. A couple of nights ago, his wife had told him what he ought to do, and now he agreed with her. He wanted to quit. Just quit. Oh yeah, he thought, I'm a great teacher. What was I thinking? All that grandstanding. The whole concert is up to you now, kids. And when Hart steps up to the challenge and it starts looking like they might actually pull something together, what do? I get all mad. And then I sit around with my feelings hurt like a big baby. I'm such a loser. I give up. At the same moment, Hart sat alone on the long bench in the office. He was dealing with some feelings of his own. Part of him wanted to grin and cheer about what he'd pulled off in chorus today. The scene had played out perfectly. Mr. Minor had been expecting one thing, and he had done the opposite. He had sprung a perfect trap. And Mr. Minor knew that he had done it on purpose. That look on Mr. Minor's face when he had popped the surprises about the concert, priceless. The guy had tried to hide it. It didn't work. The anger was right there for anybody to see. But along with the anger, Hart had seen something else. Just a glimpse before it was hidden. Hart had seen some sadness in Mr. Minard's eyes, some hurt, and part of Hart didn't feel so good about that. Still, Hart said to himself, Mr. Minard had it coming. All I did was what he was trying to do to me. I just did it better, that's all. And if he's mad about it, well, too bad. Hart tried to let that be the end of it, tried to do some math homework, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. 10 minutes later, Mr. Minard had his coat on. He grabbed his briefcase, picked up a small stack of mail from his desk, locked the music room door, and headed for the office. Mr. Minard had one hand on the office door before he saw Hart sitting there on the bench below the clock. Mr. Minard stopped, turned quickly, and hurried down the hall toward the parking lot. He shoved the envelopes into his coat pocket. The mail could wait. He had had enough of Hart Evans for one day. He was almost at the double doors when he heard, Hey, Mr. Minard. It was Hart. Mr. Minard turned around. Acting surprised, he said, Oh, it's you. I'm sort of in a hurry. Can this wait till Monday? Hart trotted down the hall until he stood right in front of the music teacher. He did his best to smile, a little out of breath. He panted harder than he needed to and fanned his face, stalling for time. He wasn't sure what he was going to say to Mr. Minard, but he felt like he ought to say something, anything. So he just started talking. I wanted to say, well, what I did in chorus today, I know it wasn't what we talked about yesterday, and I think it kind of made you mad, and I'm sorry about that, 'cause I guess I knew it would make you mad, Hart gulped and made himself keep talking, his mind barely half a step ahead of his words. But if I made you mad today, that means you weren't just sort of willing to do the concert, right? You got mad because you still really want to run the concert, right? Mr. Minor did not want to be having this conversation. He didn't want to answer Hart's question. He was tempted to turn his back and go out the door. But he didn't walk away from the question. Instead, Mr. Minor did what he had learned to do all his life. He told the truth. He nodded slightly. Yes, that's true, Hart. I would have been happy to take charge of the chorus again. Hart said, Really? Then thinking fast, he said, That's great. I'm so glad to hear you say that because I think we could put on some kind of concert. Just the kids, But I don't really know much about music. None of us does, not like you. So if we get in trouble, like with the music, will you help us? I mean, can I count on you? Mr. Minor remembered what he had seen during chorus earlier today, remembered Hart's talk with Ross, and he thought, Hart Evans is recruiting me. He's inviting me to be on his team, just like he did with Ross. The music teacher stood there with his mouth open, amazed at the nerve of this kid. Still, it felt like an honest invitation, so he gave Hart an honest answer. Yes, Mr. Minor said. Yes, you can. You can count on me. Hart smiled and stuck out his hand. Then, after a half-second's hesitation, Mr. Minor shook it, surprised by the strength he felt there, the energy, and the sincerity. Great, said Hart. Well, I've got to go back to detention, so see you Monday. Mr. Minor nodded, turned, and walked out the door, heading toward his car. As he pulled in a deep breath of cold November air, he had to smile. And just as it had earlier, one word jumped into his mind. Brilliant. Chapter 12, As Viewed from Above. The chorus room was not the only part of Palmer Intermediate School that was buzzing with fresh activity. Hart had been elected sixth grade chorus director at approximately 1:30 on Thursday, November 18th. At 3:30 that same afternoon, Mr. Richards had gotten a phone call. Mr. Richards. Yes, this is Melanie Baker. I'm Karen Baker's mom, and she's in the chorus this year. Well, today after school, Karen told me that a boy named, is it Hart? Or maybe it's Bart. Well, anyway, some sixth grade boy is the director of the chorus now, and she said that the music teacher just lets the kids go wild. Have you heard anything about this? He had not heard, but Mr. Richards didn't say that. He said, Mr. Miner is the chorus director, and he's an exceptional teacher. I know the chorus is working hard to prepare for the holiday concert these days, and if Mr. Miner has asked the students to take part in planning the concert, then the room might be a little more active than usual. Is your daughter upset about this? Mrs. Baker laughed. Who, Karen? She'd die if she knew I was calling you. She loves how crazy it is. She told me that tomorrow she's taking her CD player and some little speakers so she and a friend can practice dancing. It's me. I'm the one who's worried. It just sounds a little out of control. The principal assured Mrs. Baker that no part of the intermediate school was out of control at any time, and that he would keep a close eye on the progress of the chorus. The second phone call was waiting on hold before Mrs. Baker had said goodbye. Hi, Mr. Richards. It's Maureen Kendall. If we can, I'd like to request a schedule change for my son, Thomas. He'd like to switch to study hall after lunch, maybe in the library. Right now he has chorus during that period, but from what he's told me about the class, I think he'd do better if he could have a quiet study time instead. The principal explained that mid-year schedule changes were not possible, and then he assured Mrs. Kendall that chorus was the right place for Thomas and that any confusion in that room was only a temporary condition. By the time he left for the day, the principal had spoken with two other parents about the situation in the sixth grade chorus. Mr. Richards was not naturally a nosy person, but he was responsible for the quality of learning and the daily safety of every student, and if there was a problem in the chorus room or in any room, he needed to know about it. So he decided that the next day he would do a little snooping. Friday after lunch, instead of heading straight back to the office from the cafeteria, Mr. Richards walked outside across the playground, back inside through the gym door, down the hallway, past the media center, into the auditorium, across the stage, and out the door on the other side. He was headed toward the chorus room. He heard the class the second he turned the corner into the long hallway, and the noise increased with each step he took. And when the principal peeked through the window of the closed door, it didn't look good. Kids were sitting around on the floor. Chairs and tables were pulled into disorganized groups all over the place. The noise was far above any acceptable level, and one boy was running around the room acting like he was playing a guitar. And in the midst of this mess, there was Mr. Meinert, sitting calmly at his desk, reading. This was not right, not at all. Mr. Richards put a hand on the doorknob, but then his eye happened to stop on Hart Evans. The boy was half hidden, squatting next to some girls who were sitting on the floor. Hart nodded as one girl talked, and he looked from face to face as the others commented and took careful notes on a clipboard. Then Hart stood up, walked to a group of three boys who were arguing, listened for a minute, then said something. The boys listened, nodded. Hart made a few notes, and then he moved on. Mr. Richards knew what he was watching. He had been involved with work like this most of his professional life. This was committee work, and Hart Evans was clearly the chairperson. Yes, it was noisy, and somebody should be sitting on that boy who was dancing around the room, but the situation wasn't dangerous, and it was not out of control. He'd have to keep an eye on things, but that was all in a day's work. As Mr. Richards walked slowly back to his office, he congratulated himself on being so broad-minded and flexible. Who's afraid of a little messiness? Not me. Education is all about experimentation. That's what makes this job exciting. But in the back of the principal's mind, another thought was whispering as well. That Meinert, he is creative, but he can be pretty emotional. I sure hope he knows what he's doing.